In the burning summer of 1565, the island of Malta stood as the last stone wall between the rising Ottoman Empire and the heart of Christian Europe. On its sun-scorched cliffs, just 6,000 defenders, knights, soldiers, and peasants faced an onslaught of 40,000 Ottoman warriors, the most feared army in the world. For 4 brutal months, cannon fire shook the earth, blood soaked the sand, and faith itself became a weapon. This is not a story of numbers. It is a story of defiance, of courage carved into the rock, of men who refused to kneel before an empire that claimed the world. In the mid-16th century, the Mediterranean was a chessboard of empires. To the east, the Ottomans had swept across 3 continents, and to the west, Spain and Venice trembled under their shadow. Malta, a rocky island between Sicily and North Africa, was a dagger in the heart of Ottoman trade routes. It was held by the Knights of St. John, warriors of faith who had already survived exile from Rhodes. Their Grand Master, Jean de Valette, knew what was coming. The Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent wanted Malta wiped from the map. Suleiman had not forgotten the humiliation of 1522, when these same knights forced his armies to retreat from Rhodes. To him, Malta was not just an island, it was unfinished business. Orders were given, ships were built, and the greatest armada the Mediterranean had ever seen set sail. The Sultan sent his best, Mustafa Pasha commanding the army, Admiral Piali leading the fleet, and the legendary corsair Dragut, the scourge of the seas. Their goal, annihilate the knights and claim Malta as the Ottoman gateway to Europe. But as the horizon darkened with sails, Valette prepared his island like a man fortifying his soul. Every wall was reinforced, every cannon cleaned, every able-bodied man armed. The Maltese villagers, the knights and mercenaries swore an oath. They would not surrender even if it meant death. Malta would become a graveyard before it became Ottoman. As spring turned to summer, the air thickened with fear and salt. Watched towers signaled the coming fleet, and the island's bells rang a warning heard from Valette's cliffs to Mdina's old stone streets. Farmers abandoned their fields, women carried water to the fortresses, and the knights readied for a siege that seemed impossible to survive. Inside Fort St. Elmo, a garrison of barely 100 men stared out at the horizon, where the enemy would first strike. The Ottomans landed with thunder. 40,000 men, artillery, and cavalry poured onto the beaches of Marsac's Loch. The ground shook as they unloaded bronze cannons large enough to tear down city walls. The defenders watched from a distance, silent, knowing the storm had arrived. Valette refused to retreat into fear. He rode among his men, reminding them that their faith was stronger than any cannonball, their courage sharper than any scimitar. In Istanbul, the victory had already been celebrated before a single shot was fired. The Ottomans believed Malta would fall within weeks, just another island, another conquest. But they did not understand the defenders' resolve, nor the holy fire that burned in their hearts. The Knights of St. John were not defending territory, they were defending civilization itself. Fort St. Elmo was the smallest of Malta's fortresses, but it was the first target. The Ottomans thought it would crumble within days. From May 24th onward, their cannons roared day and night, reducing the bastions to rubble. Yet every morning the Christian flag still waved. The defenders fought like lions, repairing walls under fire, firing muskets through smoke and blood. Each day cost the Ottomans hundreds of men, but they pressed on. Dragut, The brilliant Ottoman admiral grew furious at the resistance. He ordered heavier bombardments, shouting that the knights were wasting his time. But fate intervened. A cannonball, fired blindly from Fort St. Angelo across the harbor, struck Dragut himself, killing the Ottoman legend. His death sent shockwaves through the invaders' camp. The men mourned, but the siege continued, fiercer than before. By June's end, Fort St. Elmo was nothing but shattered stone and corpses. The few remaining defenders fought to the last breath. When the Ottomans finally took the ruins, they found only 40 survivors, every one of them wounded, defiant, still clutching their swords. Valette, watching from across the bay, ordered every cannon on Malta to fire and salute. St. Elmo had fallen, but its sacrifice bought precious time and ignited a fury in the nights that would burn for the rest of the siege. The fall of St. Elmo enraged Valette. He knew the next target would be Birgu and Senglea, the twin fortresses protecting the Grand Harbor. But instead of despair, he found inspiration. He declared that every man on Malta would now fight as if the fate of Christendom rested upon his sword. And perhaps it did. Churches turned into armories, monasteries into hospitals. Even the Maltese women took up roles as nurses, messengers, and when needed, warriors. The Ottoman bombardment resumed, this time heavier than ever. Entire walls disappeared under cannon fire, yet the defenders rebuilt them at night. Each dawn, the Ottoman drums rolled, and waves of janissaries charged through smoke. They were met by musket volleys, pikes, and boiling oil. The siege turned into a slaughterhouse, every inch of ground soaked in blood. Valette fought among his men, sword in hand, never resting. His courage became legend. He told his men that to die here was to earn eternal glory, that Malta was their altar and their sacrifice. The defenders believed him. What began as a hopeless battle became a crusade of faith, and the Knights of St. John became immortal in spirit long before the siege ended. By mid-July, the Ottomans were losing patience. Their army was vast, their cannons mighty, but the knights refused to die. Mustafa Pasha ordered continuous assaults, but his men were weary, sick, and demoralized. The heat was merciless, water was scarce, and disease spread through the camps. The once mighty army began to rot from within. The defenders, meanwhile, fought with the strength of desperation. They used every trick: night raids, flaming arrows, hidden tunnels. Small groups of knights would sneak behind enemy lines, slaughtering sleeping soldiers before vanishing into the darkness. For the Ottomans, the island seemed cursed. No matter how many died, the Christian banners still waved from the ramparts. Valette's spies learned that the Ottoman morale was crumbling. Supplies were running low, tempers flared among the commanders, and Piali and Mustafa began to argue over strategy. The unity of the great Ottoman army was unraveling, while the defenders' unity only grew stronger. Malta, the tiny island once considered insignificant, had become the graveyard of empires. As August dawned, both sides were near exhaustion. The Ottomans had lost thousands, yet they launched one final offensive, a massive attack on Senglea and Birgu. Their cannons pounded the walls for days, opening gaping breaches. Waves of janissaries surged forward, screaming war cries, determined to end it. But Valette was waiting. He unleashed his last reserves knights in shining armor, local militias, and hidden artillery. The defenders counterattacked with ferocity that stunned the Ottomans. Muskets blazed, swords clashed, and bodies piled high. Even when wounded, Valette refused to leave the field. His presence was a beacon, His voice cut through the chaos. "For Christ and Malta," he cried. The men followed, turning despair into fury. The Ottomans retreated, beaten back again, their strength broken, their will shattered. For the first time in the entire campaign, the great Ottoman army fled before the defenders. Malta had survived the worst, and the tide of the siege had turned. The final act of the siege began with thunder. September brought storms that drenched the camps, turning them into fields of mud and misery. The Ottoman cannons sank into the earth, their powder spoiled, their morale collapsing. Mustafa Pasha knew time was running out. Word reached him that a Christian relief force from Sicily was on its way. He had to finish the job or face disaster. He ordered one last all-out assault, throwing every remaining soldier at the walls. But the defenders, though half dead, were unbreakable. Cannonballs ripped through the attackers. Flaming pitch burned their siege towers, and Maltese peasants hurled stones from rooftops. The island itself seemed to fight back. When the Sicilian fleet appeared on the horizon, panic erupted in the Ottoman camp. The soldiers who once dreamed of glory now ran for their lives. The invincible empire, humbled by a handful of knights and villagers, began its retreat. When the smoke cleared, Malta was a ruin of stone and ash. Every fortress bore the scars of war, every street lined with the fallen. But against all odds, the island still stood free. Of the 6,000 defenders, barely 2,000 remained alive. Yet they had achieved the impossible. They had stopped the mightiest empire on earth. Europe rejoiced. Bells rang in every church, from Madrid to Rome. The Pope called Valette the savior of Christendom. The Knights of St. John, once exiles, were now legends. The Siege of Malta became a symbol of endurance, of faith stronger than steel. Suleiman the Magnificent, enraged by defeat, swore vengeance but never lived to see it. The Ottoman dream of conquering Europe began to fade. The tide of history had turned, and it began here on the rocks of Malta. The survivors of Malta walked among the ruins like ghosts. Burned homes, shattered churches, and cratered streets told stories of unthinkable endurance. Valette, now hailed as a living legend, refused to let victory turn to complacency. He ordered the reconstruction of the fortresses, not in celebration, but as a warning to any who would return. The siege had proven that courage could defeat empires, but it had also shown the cost of freedom. The Maltese people, once simple islanders, had become warriors through fire and loss. Families buried their dead with prayers and silence, knowing their sacrifice had saved more than just Malta, it had saved Europe. Even the wounded knights, covered in scars, spoke not of glory but of duty. They had seen too much blood to call it triumph. And yet, from that devastation, a new Malta was born. The people rebuilt their homes stone by stone, their spirit unbroken. Valette swore that the island would never again stand vulnerable. From ashes he would raise a city that would defy time itself, a city that would bear his name. In 1566, 1 year after the siege, Grand Master Jean de Valette laid the first stone of a new fortress city. He stood before his people, frail yet unbowed, and declared that Valletta would rise as a beacon of strength and faith. The Pope and the kings of Europe sent architects, money, and builders. The city's walls would be impregnable, its design a masterpiece of military engineering. Every street was drawn with precision, every bastion shaped to resist cannon fire. Valletta was not just a city, it was a statement. Its cathedral bells would ring where once cannonballs fell, Its harbor would welcome ships of peace instead of war. The island that once bled now became the shield of the Mediterranean. For the Knights of St. John, Valette was both a monument and a sanctuary. They walked its walls with pride, knowing their legacy was carved in limestone and faith. To visitors, the city seemed eternal, but to the Knights it was a promise to guard the Christian world as fiercely as they had guarded Malta. Far to the east, news of the defeat shook the Ottoman Empire. In Istanbul, the Sultan's court was silent. As the truth arrived, the invincible army had been broken by 6,000 defenders. Suleiman the Magnificent, furious and humiliated, reportedly refused to speak of Malta again. His generals whispered that the siege had drained their spirit as much as their strength. The Ottoman navy began to lose its dominance in the Mediterranean. European powers, once fearful, now united with new confidence. The Spanish fleets prepared for their own reckoning against the Turks, culminating years later at Lepanto. The Siege of Malta had lit a spark that spread across Christendom. For the first time in a century, the balance of power began to shift. The myth of Ottoman invincibility had died on the shores of Malta, and the tiny island fortress had become a symbol proof that no empire, however vast, could crush the will of a united people. As decades passed, the Order of St. John transformed from wandering crusaders into rulers of a thriving island. Valette became their jewel, a place of learning, medicine, and naval power. The Knights built hospitals that treated the sick of all nations, regardless of faith. They sponsored artists, engineers, and scholars, making Malta a beacon of civilization amid turbulent seas. Yet, beneath the splendor, the memory of the siege lingered like a sacred wound. Each year, the survivors gathered in prayer, their armor polished, their banners carried high. Songs were sung of St. Elmo's fall, of the day Dragut died, of Valette's unyielding courage. The siege was not just history, it was identity. And through the centuries, even as empires rose and fell, the Knight's oath remained unbroken. To defend, to heal, to protect. The world would forget many battles, but not Malta. The island's blood had written its name across eternity. Time, as always, became the quiet thief of memory. The heroes of Malta faded into legend, their names etched in fading stone. But for those who still walked the island's ancient streets, the echoes of cannon fire could still be felt in the wind. The Maltese people carried the story not in books, but in their bones. Visitors from distant lands marveled at the beauty of Valette, unaware that its walls were built upon graves. Beneath every street lay the foundations of sacrifice. The siege of 1565 was not merely a military event, it was a story of human endurance against impossible odds. Generations later, historians would call it one of the greatest sieges in history. But to the descendants of those who fought, it was something deeper, a tale of faith, unity, and the unbreakable heart of a small island that refused to die. Even after the siege, the Ottomans never forgot Malta. For decades, their fleets prowled the seas, dreaming of revenge. But the scars of 1565 haunted them. Each new attempt to challenge European strongholds ended in failure, their empire slowly turning inward. The once glorious Ottoman expansion began to crumble under its own weight. Malta, meanwhile, thrived. It became a fortress of both stone and spirit, its harbors filled with ships bearing the cross of St. John. The Ottomans had underestimated what they faced, not merely an army, but an idea that freedom and faith, when united, could withstand any storm. As the centuries rolled on, the crescent moon and the cross still met upon the waves, but never again with such ferocity. The Siege of Malta remained the turning point, the day when one small island taught the world that empires could bleed. Today, the Siege of Malta stands not just as history, but as heritage. The fortresses still rise against the sea breeze, the cannons still face the horizon, and the spirit of defiance still whispers through Valletta's narrow streets. The memory of Valette and his knights lives in every stone, every echo, every prayer. Modern Malta is a nation of peace, yet its people carry the courage of their ancestors. The story of 1565 reminds the world that even the smallest corner of the earth can hold the fate of empires. When courage meets conviction, even 40,000 enemies cannot prevail. And so, as the sun sets over the grand harbor, the shadows of the past linger. The sea glows crimson in the dying light, as if remembering the blood once spilled upon its waves. The Siege of Malta is over, but the flame of defiance still burns, eternal as the rock upon which it was fought. The Siege of Malta was not merely a clash of armies, it was a war of faith, endurance, and destiny. In that summer of 1565, the world witnessed how courage could alter history. Against all odds, 6,000 defenders stood against 40,000 invaders and changed the course of empires. Their story is not one of conquest, but of conviction, not of strength, but of spirit. Malta became a symbol of resistance, a beacon for generations that would one day face their own battles. And when the world feels overrun by darkness, we remember the island that stood alone beneath the sun and won.